Yeah. That's it.
That's it.
All right. You gotta go.
Boker Tov, Shavua Tov, welcome back, everybody. Again, it's hard to believe that this time 1 week ago, shul was closed. We weren't allowed to be opened, as we mentioned it. Sudash Nashid yesterday, Shvat Hashem Karef Ayin. Long may it stay this way. Okay, we are making our way through volume 19, Tzurba Rabbanan. Now dealing with the halachot related to home maintenance on Shabbat. Last time, whenever that was, for our brief hiatus, we started talking about sweeping floors. Let's move on to the next section. We'll begin on page 265. 265 in the book. Now that we have swept up the floors, we want to know if we can wash the floors. That's going to be the next topic. And from there, we'll get on to some other halachot related to taking care of one's home for Shabbat, related to the topic of hachana, of preparation from Shabbat to Chol, and we'll see where that takes us. So, source number 20. On page 265 regarding washing the floor. You remember we had a discussion last time. You may remember, hopefully remember. If you don't, you can look it up on YouTube. But we had a discussion about sweeping the floors, right? We saw that in those days, especially when a floor is made of earth and dust, etc., that sweeping would be problematic, according to many of the Rishonim. We saw that because you are essentially smoothing out the floor. We asked the question, what happens if I have a paved floor? Would I be allowed to sweep there? And there were those opinions that said no, that we have a gzeira of a paved floor because of an unpaved floor. They then said that in a situation whereby most of the floors in the city are paved, so then there would not be an issue, and that seems to be the practical halacha. So page 265, source number 20. We're now dealing with the question of washing the floor, which is a little bit more stringent rather than sweeping it for reasons we'll see below. So source number 20 says the Gemara. ואמר רב יהודה משמוע מעשה בתלמידו של רבי מאיר שנכנס אחריו לבית המרחץ ביקש להדיח קרקע. Okay, so Rabbi Meir's student came and he wanted to wash the floor on Shabbat, obviously. אמר לו, said Rabbi Meir, אין מדיחין. He said, no, you can't do that. We can't wash the floor. לסוך בקרקע, or to smear sort of oil on the ground. Also, אמר לו, אין צריכין, קרקע בקרקע מחלפה. In other words, what comes out of the Gemara is this. Here we are seemingly talking about inside the bathhouse. We're dealing with a paved floor, a tiled floor. But he says, nonetheless, we are concerned, karka b'karka michlafa, the same svara that we saw when it comes to sweeping, that if you're going to come to start washing the floor here, you wash the floor there. And that will be a problem. We see the Rambam, and he has quite machmir on this. The Rambam in source number 21, he says, En sachin zakarka v'afilo ayal sufa avanim. So he says explicitly, you cannot smear the floor with oil, even if it's paved. Yes, it's stones, but whatever. Even on Yom Tov, you cannot wash the floor, and all the more so on Shabbat. That you should not come to do it the way you do it normally on a weekday. As we saw, when it comes to sweeping the floor, any floor that is not paved, whether you're sweeping, whether you're washing, whatever you're doing, we're concerned that you're going to come to fill in the holes and therefore smooth out the floor. That's going to be a violation of a melacha. And therefore, says the Rambam, that when it comes to washing, we're going to be more stringent. Now, the question is, we don't make any distinction over here between paved floors, not paved floors, etc. Why are we going to be more stringent when it comes to washing than we were when it comes to sweeping? As we discussed last time, there are many leniencies when it comes to sweeping a paved floor. So says the Magid Mishnah, he explains the Rambam. He says the washing is different. He says, Pelush ledato afa pisha kibud mutar b'ratzof. The Rambam said on a smooth floor, on a paved floor, you can sweep it. Why can you not wash it? He says, Elu advarim asulim v'gazul behem lefi she'en behem tzorech k'mo b'kibud. Okay, so interesting principle here when it comes to Gzerot of Chazal. So says the Magid Mishnah, Chazal made a Gzerah. They did not allow, they allowed sweeping because that is a very, very common need. They didn't allow washing because it's not so, you don't need to. We're still concerned about the reasons of the Gzerahs that apply. And therefore, since there's not such a great need for washing the floor, even on a paved floor, you would not be allowed to, wash it. What if there is a great need to wash a paved floor? We'll see that in a moment. I'm sure you can think of some examples. So, says the Shulchan Aruch over the page in source number 23 on top of 266. He says, says, don't wash the floor even if it's paved. explains the Mishnah Berurah, lo madichin oto, v'tam kol eile, mishum dachashina nashvot gomot. We're concerned, as we saw last time, that you're going to come to smooth out the floor and fill in the holes. V'afilu laman deshali kibud b'Shabbat, even the one who does allow at the end of the day sweeping on Shabbat. Nonetheless, shaniach, here it's different. He says that there is more of a concern when it comes to sweep. If you are washing the floor, right? Not like sweeping, we just want to get rid of some of the dirt and take away the obstruction. You're washing the floor, you're trying to make it look nice. And therefore, when you're washing and you come and you'll see that there are holes and things, you'll come to smooth them out, you'll come to change it. And therefore, it's more of a concern. And therefore, okay, so therefore, those are the two reasons that why washing is going to be more stringent than sweeping. Now, as we said, what if there is a pressing need of washing the floor? So the Shut Or Letzion, Rav Ben Zion Abba Shaul, he says over here as follows, source number 25. He says, if the floor is exceptionally dirty, and he says, then we could be lenient and we could allow one to wash it. Right? As we saw, the Magid Mishnah explained that sweeping is more lenient than washing because there's a greater need for it. It's more urgent. Therefore, if washing, for whatever reason, is going to be urgent, for example, the floor is exceedingly dirty. What about in a hospital? Right? You have to wash the floor every day. There's no question. There's reasons of sanitation, etc. And therefore, it is urgent. Therefore, there we say tinakadin kibud. There, that case would be the same as sweeping. So he says we have two factors that we can add together for leniency. We can take in the factor that there is an opinion that says if most of the floors in the city are paved, so we can rely on that, together with the fact that washing the floor is very, very important. Then you could take a magav and you could wash it. Now, he doesn't get into here, we're not getting into now, if we say that washing is allowed, so there's certain ways that it could be done and certain ways that it can't be done. If you're going to take a cloth, that's a problem because wringing out the cloth and squeezing out the water, that's going to be forbidden. So again, it all has to be done in the proper way, but we're talking about the preliminary stage, whether the actual act of washing the floor itself, is that going to be allowed in the permitted way? So we said, Shulchan Aruch Mishnah Berurah, default position is no, don't wash the floors. Says Or Letzion, if there's a great need for it, we have what to rely on. The Orchot Shabbat.
Together, okay, so it's paved, then doesn't have to be
He says, right, but in other words, but tziruf to what? But tziruf to the fact that there's a great need for it. That's what we're saying. So therefore, if there's a great need, then you can do it l'katchila. Right, that's what he says. Orchot Shabbat, source number 26, he says a similar thing. Just have a look. The second section in bold, about halfway through. He says, generally speaking, we should not be lenient to wash the floors on Shabbat. Where there is a great need for it, and it's very, very, very urgent. Right? There are those who were lenient. Obviously, we're not going to come to squeeze out liquid, and he explains the reasons based on the Magid Mishnah that we just saw, based on reading of the Rambam as well. Okay, over the page.
Does he define what great need is anywhere? Are we going to find that? Great need for my wife is if there's a need for me.
So we're gonna get onto this when we're talking about washing dishes as well. But we're talking about objectively a great need. The floor is very, very dirty. I mean, the hospital, that's an easy one. But that's the language they use. So they say, if there's like a little bit of a little bit of a spill or whatever, then I would say no. The whole thing is, you can't look at it, you can't walk there. So that would seem to be a great need. What's interesting over here, the poskim discuss, what if it's not the entire floor? What if there's just a spill in one small area, right? So we can't wash the floor. Does that extend to even a small part, even a small section? So have a look over the page. The Shema Shabbat Kilchata quotes of Shlomo Zalman. He says, אפשר שמותר ליתן מים על מקום המלוכלך שברצפה בלבד ונגב באופן המותר. Again, all these things we have to be careful in terms of how we're doing it, with spilling the water and drying the water and squeezing the cloths, etc. Okay, but those are details. But he says if there's a part of the floor that became dirt, he says it's possible that you could pour water and dry it and clean it. אין זה בכלל איסור שטיפת הרצפה. שמעתי מהגאון רב שלמה זלמן אוירבך זצ"ל. Okay, so he says he seems to understand that this din was said about the entire floor. If it's just a small section that you could clean, certainly if you take the two things together, right? If it's a small section and there's a great need, and then we'd be okay. Rav Ovadia also adds, he says that. He also says that the floor, in this case, means the floor, does not mean the countertop. You're allowed to clean the countertop. And of course, there are still those who are lenient. There are always those who are stringent. The Chut Shani, in source number 29 of Karelet in Bnei Brak, he says, אם נשפך מים בטעות על גבי הרצפה, או שנכנסו מי גשמים לתוך הבית וכיוצא בו, מותר לגרוף את המים מעל גבי הרצפה על ידי מקל גומי, שאין זה בכלל איסור הדחת הקרקע. He says, if water had just spilled, and you're just dragging out the water, getting rid of it, he says that's not considered washing. כיוון שאין כוונתו להדיח את הקרקע, לסלק את המים ממקום זה, you're just getting the water out of that place. He does say that if you want to come and wash, but even a small area, he was stringent about that. But as we've seen, Rav Ovadia, Rav Shlomo Zalman are going to be lenient there to clean a little bit of the floor. Okay, let's move on. Let's turn over the page to 270. So now this is an interesting sugya. This is a case that comes up. Everybody learns Hilchot Shabbat. Everybody's learned a little bit the principles of Hilchot Shabbat, knows about the case of dragging a bench or a table across the floor, right? Because this is what the classic case where we learn about davar sheino mitkaven and psik reisha. And we have a machloket between two Tanaim, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, throughout Hilchot Shabbat. In fact, it's not just about Hilchot Shabbat, but it's throughout Kol HaTorah Kula. The question is, if I perform an action which where I intend to do one thing, but inadvertently I do something else, right? Meaning it was not my intention now to perform Chilul Shabbat, it was not my intention to perform whatever prohibition. Is that going to be a problem? According to Rabbi Yehuda, says no. He says, I don't care what you intended or what you didn't intend. The fact is you did it, and therefore you can't do it. You should know. You should know better. Rabbi Shimon says no. He says if it's not your intent, then it's going to be permitted. The exception, of course, is what's called psik reisha, which is where it's definitely going to happen. Now, the whole machloka between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon regarding a no mitkaven, where I don't intend to do something, and it might not happen. It might not happen, therefore it's okay. But if it's definitely going to happen, that's a psik reisha, and that's going to be more complicated, and even Rabbi Shimon will agree that you can't do that. But let's see, this comes up. So the classic case, the example which is brought, is the case of dragging a bed, a chair, or a bench, whatever, on the ground. And as you're dragging it on the ground, it's going to make a ditch, and that's going to be part of the malacha of plowing the ground. So over here in source number 30, we have, this is the Gemara Masechet Shabbat. Rav Amar, Ein halacha Rabbi Shimon b'greira, v'Shmuel Amar halacha Rabbi Shimon b'greira. Okay, so just understand the structure of the Gemara. What I mentioned now was a machloket Tanaim between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. Then the question is, who do we paskin like? Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. We have machloket Amoraim in later generation between Rav and Shmuel. So Rav says that we don't follow Rabbi Shimon regarding the halacha, and Shmuel says we do follow Rabbi Shimon. So then Abaye says, Kol milei damar avid karav, levar ma'nitlat ka'avid David kishmuel. Says Abaye, whenever we have a machloket Amoraim between Rav and Shmuel, we paskin like Rav, except for three cases. There are three exceptions where we paskin like Shmuel. One of those is so where Shmuel said that we paskin like Rabbi Shimon. So Abaye said me that we paskin like Shmuel against Rav, who follows Rabbi Shimon against Rabbi Yehuda. Right? That's the process. And essentially, what did Rabbi Shimon say? He says, "Alachak Rabbi Shimon b'greira, Detanya, Rabbi Shimon omer, gorer adam mita kisei v'safsal." A person can drag, right, a bed, a chair, a bench, whatever it is. Ubilvad shelo yitkaven lasot charetz. If you're dragging it along, if you want to, right, you want to plow your field, but you don't have a plow. All you have is a big table, and you want to drag it along in order to perform that action. So that's mitkaven. That would be forbidden even according to Rabbi Shimon. But that's not what we're talking about. You're dragging the thing along. Why are you dragging it along? Because it's too heavy, because you can't pick it up. Okay. It may or may not make a furrow in the ground. Okay. Says Rabbi Shimon, that's permitted. That's exactly the halakha of Eino mitkaven, and that's okay. Now, the Gemara here asks, when Rabbi Shimon says you can drag, again, what are we talking about? A small table, a large table, right? If you're able to carry it without dragging it, you still have the leniency of Eino mitkaven. So that's what the Gemara continues. Source number 31. It says, Resh Knisha debatza garal safsela le'ela mi Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabba. So he was dragging along a bench before Rabbi Yirmiyah on Shabbat. Amar le'keman Rabbi Shimon. You are dragging along, you must be paskening like Rabbi Shimon. Hey, Madam Rabbi Shimon bagdolim de lo efshar biktanim yamar. He says, Rabbi Shimon only said, I can rely on this leniency and no mitkaven when I'm dealing with a large table, a large bench, which I can't pick up with my hands. But if I have to drag it, but if it's a small one and I don't have to drag it, then why? So he says, says the Gemara, this is that's one interpretation. That's Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabbi, right? It says, Ula machloket b'ktanim aval b'gdolim divrei hakol mutar. So Ula learns it completely differently. He says, no. That's when it comes to a small, even if it's a small one, Rabbi Shimon says you're allowed to drag it. But where it's a large bench where you can't lift it up, then everybody says you can drag it. Okay. Bottom line is that the Gemara here at the end of the day it accepts this interpretation, and we'll see here the Shulchan Aruch in source number 32, and he says davar she'ein mitkaven mutar. Okay, that's our principle. That's throughout Ilchot Shabbat. And as I said, in fact, throughout Kol HaTorah Kula, it's fascinating discussion to look at different areas of halakha and see different examples of things which are a no mitkaven that are allowed or not. I'll give you, by the way, just one interesting example, just off the top of my head. I think we've spoken here once, many, a long time ago. We spoke about using secular dates and secular calendar. This is a question which comes up, by the way, by the days of the week and by the months of the year, because many of those names originally come from names which are related to idolatry. Now, nobody said, right, Sunday, Monday, the Sunday, the moon, whatever. Right? Nobody here, I don't think there's anybody in this Shiur who says, I'll meet you for an appointment on Monday, and when they say Monday, they intend to be paying homage to Avodah Zarah, to the moon or whatever it is. Nobody has that in mind. And therefore, that's one of the tendencies the poskim who say, there are those who say, by the way, that you shouldn't use secular dates at all. You should say Yom Rishon, Yom Sheni. My daughter's very makbid about this. Whenever we say on Monday, she says, what day is that? What's it in Hebrew? So, I'm kidding. It's not just because she doesn't know it in English. Not because she doesn't. But by and large, the minhag haolam. I had a Rebbe once who would not use days of the weeks in English. He would say, I'll see you on Yom Rishon, on Yom Sheni. He would, on principle, he would not say. But most people, minhag haolam is to say, how are we allowed to say it? It's based in Avodah Zarah. Answer is, eino mitkaven. You don't have the intent to be celebrating Avodah Zarah in any way when you say the name of the day of the week, and therefore, so that's an example of eino mitkaven in other areas as well. In any event, back to our topic. So says the Shulchan Aruch, davar she'eino mitkaven mutar, where you are not intending to perform the forbidden action, the melacha, whatever it is, that's permitted. V'hu shelo yehei psik reisha, meaning where it might happen, if it's an inevitable consequence of psik reisha, that would still be forbidden. Okay. And therefore, he says, okay, you can drag along your bed, your chair, your bench, where it's not definitely going to happen, as long as you're not intending to make a furrow. Whether it's a big bench or small bench, whatever, you can drag it along. Okay, so now the question is this. All of that applies. We're saying even when you're dragging it along the earth and dragging it through the dirt, we say because of Rabbi Shimon you're allowed to, because it's eino mitkaven. What would happen if I was dragging this back? According to the opinion here, the stringent opinion that said you cannot drag it along the ground because you might make a furrow, what would be the case if I'm dragging it along a paved floor? So obviously there, I'm not going to create a ditch in the ground. But just like we saw by sweeping or by washing the floor, we said there was a gzeirah of one floor because of the other floor. Maybe the same would apply here. So we have such an opinion in the Gemara. In source number 33, it says, Avin Tzipora gara safsala bileta dishesh. He was dragging along his benches on a marble floor. Right, Rabbi Yitzchak ben Azar. Amarle, He said to him, if I'm going to be silent, I'm not going to say anything to you. Rabbi Yehuda nafik mine chuva. According to Rabbi Yehuda, right, who holds against Rabbi Shimon, this is going to be a problem. This is going to cause damage. Gzera alita de shisha atu alita de alba. And therefore, we should say that there is a, according to this opinion, we should say there is a gzera of dragging this bench along a paved floor, along a marble floor, also because of a standard earth floor. That is according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Now, we've just seen that we don't hold like Rabbi Yehuda, we hold like Rabbi Shimon. So, but there is an opinion of, look at the Rokach, in source number 34. The Rokach learns this Gemara the following way. He says, Kaimalan Rabbi Shimon. Gorer Adam Mitaki Sev Safsal Bivad Shloit Kaven Asot Charetz. We paskin, as we said, like Rabbi Shimon, that it's allowed, it's not mikaven. Ben Gdolim, Ben Tanim. Baperik Bamem Madlikin, Aval Gdolot Me'od Asur Davei Psik Reisha. Okay, if it's a small bench or it's a large bench, and I'm going to carry it, it may or may not make a furrow in the ground, and therefore I can do it because they know mikaven. But if it's a very large bench, then it's it's of the size that I'm going to carry it, it's definitely going to make the ditch in the ground. Then I cannot do that, even according to Rabbi Shimon, because that would be a psik reisha. So then he says, according to that, not only if it's a very large bench, not only can I not carry it on the earth ground, but even on a smooth ground, on a smooth floor made of marble, he says, there we have that, we still have that gzeira. So here the question is, can I drag very, very large items inside my house? According to this, that could be a problem. So says the Shiur Tziyun, he says all this is going to be it's going to be similar to the previous sugya that we saw. He says like this: Mistabra dim kol ha'ir mu'tzaf b'avanim or b'krashim yesh lakar b'zeh. Just like we said by sweeping the floor, if most of the city, if most of the floor as they are nowadays are in fact a smooth floor, then I don't have to be concerned for this gzera. Even if we're going to be even if we were going to be if we were going to be machmer regarding sweeping, here it is more lenient, because even if you are dragging on a non-paved floor, it would not be an isur d'oraita, at most would be a d'Rabbanan. He goes on to say, if it's psik reisha, etc. So therefore, at the end of the day, dragging even very large objects on the floor inside the house, that would be permitted. There is a different concern, right? Which is that if we're dealing here with tircha on Shabbat, we're dealing with unnecessary exertion, right? This is not a leniency now to go and start rearranging all your furniture, every Shabbat, start moving the bookcases, start dragging this. That is not proper. Okay.
They have to get wooden floors. You drag something heavy over it, you make the little scratch.
It's a problem for the floor, but it's probably in terms of. I mean, again, the issue over here is relating to smoothing out the ground, is related to choresh and plowing. And in that case, I don't think that's at the end of the day, if you're making a scratch, it's a no mitkaven. There's not really any. You're asking in terms of the melacha, maybe of writing. I don't think that's a concern. Okay. So the Orchot Shabbat says over there, number 36, contemporary posek. He says, "Kelim kvidim me'od, asher gliratam al gabei karka oseh chalitz en legaram b'Shabbat." Right, very, very heavy objects that I'm dragging on the ground outside that I can't do. Afilim ha'karka murtzefet gam ken eno goram v'atam mishum degazur b'zeh murtzaf at ve'eno murtzaf. V'aynu davka asher gorim michutz labait kegon b'chatzer murtzefet. So he says similar to what we saw previously. He says if you're dragging it outside, right, very, very heavy object, don't drag it outside, even if it's on a paved floor. But inside, since all the houses are paved, you can drag whatever you want inside. Okay. In terms of this halacha, as I said before, in terms of uvda dechol, in terms of weekday activity and tircha, etc. It's funny. It's one of the examples. They often give they used to give, I don't know if they still do, but at these kiruv seminars, etc., when they talk about what is the definition of melacha, it's the example they always used to give, right? They say people think that melacha on Shabbat means work, right? It means exertion. So if I'm going around and I'm running up and down the stairs and I'm carrying objects around my house, so that's exertion. But that, on a Torah level, that's okay. That's not melacha. But if I'm switching on the light bulb, right, pressing the switch, that's not exertion, but it's creative labor. So that's forbidden. So that's the example that they always give. The example is correct with one caveat, which is on a Doraita level, that's true. But melacha means creative labor, as we've learned very, very, very many times. But going along and doing work in the sense of exertion and running around and doing things, that's also going to be prohibited on Shabbat. It's not prohibited because it's a melacha, but it's prohibited because of uvdin dachol or because of exertion. It's probably going to be an isur d'Rabbanan. That's still nonetheless that's not proper to do for Shabbat. Obviously, if there's certain exceptions and if there's a need for it, whatever, we can talk about that. That does not include setting the table for your guests, right? That's exertion which is permitted. Okay,
So the table is outside.
Yes.
You drag it a little outside on the solid. Let's say you have a patio.
Yeah. So again, it depends how big the table is. So he says, no, again, the first level is how big is the object that we're talking about, right? Rabbi Shimon said, the pshat of the Gemara was that Rabbi Shimon said, "Ben ktanim ben gdolim." He says, "You're not eno mitkaven. You don't intend to create a furrow in the ground. So then it's mutar, even on a non-paved floor. If it's a very, very large object, it's definitely going to be that it's psik reisha. So there, that's what the Ochot Shabbat says. He says that would be forbidden even on a paved floor outside. You should pick it up rather than drag. Okay. Another case where this comes up very, very often, the question is in terms of pushing a stroller, dragging a stroller through the ground, etc., or a pram. So Shut Yechavedad Ravadia Yosef, he writes about this. He says, Grirat agala agaver afar v'chol. You're pushing the pram over the earth and sand. This is not considered a psik reisha, and this is permitted, right? We're not concerned that every time you push the pram, you're going to dig into the ground and it's going to be choresh. He says that would be fine, and even if it is, he says it's going to be a psik reisha. It's not your ground. Over the page 38, Rav Ribiat in the 39 Melachot, he says, pushing a carriage or stroller on bare soil, even soft earth, is permissible, even if a distinct wheel mark appears. This is because the rolling motion of the wheels does not loosen the soil, rather compresses it. Compacting the soil does not improve in any way for planting, and is therefore not choresh. Okay, so moving on now to some more activities of household maintenance, which may be related to the issur, the prohibition of hachana, of preparing from Shabbat to Chol. So one question that often comes up, washing dishes on Shabbat, and this is before we even get into the questions about dishwashers. Yeah.
Just on the point, like it's talking about all the like chofer and glue and whatever. What about issues like working up brass like that?
So again, this is brought up. This would be the classic case of eno mitkaven, meaning if when I'm walking or pushing or whatever it is, with every step or every push, I may rip the grass, but I may not. So that's a classic case of eno mitkaven. It's not a psik reisha, and therefore that would be permitted. Okay, so washing dishes, believe it or not, is actually mentioned in the Gemara. We have a sugya in Masechet Shabbat, talks about whether you can wash the dishes on Shabbat or not. So he says like this, source number 39, page 275. Tan Rabbanan, ke'alot shachal b'en alvit, medichan nechol b'en shachrit. Bowls from which you ate on Shabbat at night, the evening meal, you can wash them to eat from them in the morning. Shachrit medichin nechol b'en b'tzalayim. You ate from them in the morning, you can wash them to eat from them for Surah Shlishit. B'tzalayim, or to eat later in the afternoon. B'tzalayim medichin nechol b'en b'mincha. In other words, the principle is until the afternoon, so long as there's still going to be more Shabbat meals, and I may need to use these bowls again, or I will need to use these bowls again, then I can wash them up, right? That is okay. Somebody asked me once, they were very distressed because they were asked to wash up their bowls on Friday night after the meal for Shabbat, which was the next day. And they said, how can I prepare for one to the next day? So that's not an issue. Friday night and Shabbat day are considered the same. That's still Shabbat. So that's all part of the same thing. However, says the Gemara, but now it's in the afternoon after we finished all our meals, so you cannot wash anymore. However, cups and things that you drink from, that you can wash all day. Right? Everybody knows how it is. You go when you have a meal, you take out a plate, whatever. In my house, there's always at least a dozen cups on the counter, that people are drinking from, even though there's about half the amount of people in the house. It doesn't matter. Every time you want to drink, you go, you come back, you carry on drinking, you take a new cup, etc. So when it comes to cups, it's en keval hashtia. Person's drinking all day long, right? Hopefully not alcoholic. But a person's drinking all day long. When it comes to the plates and the bowls, etc., that you only need for the meals. So once the meals have concluded, you can no longer wash up the plates, but you can carry on washing up the cups. Why not? What's the problem here with washing? So the Rambam says something which may be surprising. Rambam in source number 40 says, it's a type of plate or serving bowl that they would have. This is like repairing. This is like fixing something. Right? We have a Tzurba of mitaken kli. We've seen it in a number of contexts. He says, if I have a dirty dish, I can't use it right now because it's dirty. When I clean it and I wash it, it's like I'm repairing. It's like I'm fixing that dish, and therefore that's a problem. In other words, if I'm now washing it in order to use it again after Shabbat, so I'm repairing it and creating it for after Shabbat, that's a problem. But if I'm washing it up to use it again for the same Shabbat, that's fine, obviously. I'd like the Gemara said, when it comes to cups, etc., you can wash them whenever. The Rabbi gives a slightly different explanation. He says, because what the Rambam essentially said was, the problem here with washing is that it's similar to a melacha of repairing, of fixing these plates. Rabbi says, no. He says, so very simply, it's unnecessary exertion, preparation for weekday, and therefore it's not allowed. So the Shulchan Aruch says, you can wash up, and again, when we're talking about washing, I'm not talking about what kind of sponge you can use in squeezing, etc. All of those are details within the. But he said, you can wash up utensils for the use on Shabbat. Certainly, if you still have one of the Shabbat meals, so you'll need those kelim. After Sudah Shlishit, you can no longer wash up. Except for the things you drink from, which you can use, you can wash up all day because you might come to use them. So the Mishnah Berurah writes here, even if you have 10 cups and you only really need one, right? You can wash them all up because you don't know which one you're going to use. You might, like I said, it might be very often you only need 1 cup and somehow 5 cups end up getting dirty. That's what happens. So that's okay. And then he says, Kagon shenish'al, yeah, at the top of page 277, okay, it's not just I'm saying I finished the meal on Friday night, or I finished the meal on Shabbat morning, so now I'm going to go and wash everything up because I've still got a meal left. But you know that actually at the next meal you're not going to need any of these plates. So no, that's not what we mean. We mean is if you still have a use for them on the Shabbat day. You're having guests around, you're having an extra kiddush, you're having whatever, and you're actually going to need another meal, and you know that, so then you can go and wash them up. Even if it's after Sudah Shlishit. Again, the determining factor here is not necessarily the time of day, but it's whether you're actually going to have that meal again. The Shevet HaLevi Rav Wosner's discussion says, okay, what if I have enough kelim in the cupboard that I've finished my meal, I've got all the dirty dishes, I could wash those dishes and use the same dishes again for the next meal, or I could leave them in the sink and I could take out new dishes for the next meal. So he says, better, if you don't actually need them, better to use new ones. But nonetheless, there's what's a line if one wants to wash those and use them again, that is acceptable as well. Okay, another question which the Poskim discuss is what about...
That just rinsing? In other words, you have stuff caked on a plate at night.
Yes, that's exactly what we're going to talk about right now. That's exactly the next topic. Let's say a plate, or not necessarily even a plate, but you have a pot, and you have the sauce that's burnt on the hot plate or whatever it is, and you need to leave it in water and let it soak so that it's going to be easier to clean after Shabbat. Is that permitted? So yeah, we have a machloket. And it's a surprising machloket. We have the Shemat Shabbat Kelchata, who is maker, and Rabbi Tzurba, who is machmir. Normally it's the other way around. But so the Shemat Shabbat says here in source number 45, he says, Gam kelim asher achlei hotzat tafshil mehem kayam chashash shetidbakna she'ilrot b'dofnei hakli. Says, even if after you've taken all the food out of the pot, but now you're worried, or whatever's left on the pot or on the plate is going to now stick to the sides of stick to the walls of the pot. And therefore it's going to be much more difficult to clean it after Shabbat. He says, now on Shabbat you can soak it in water. So the reason he gives is that you're soaking it now, that's going to prevent the status from changing. Right? Meaning right now the food's not stuck onto the pot. But if you leave it like that, it's going to congeal and it's going to be harder to get off. And therefore now you can soak it. He says, if it's already stuck on, it's already hard, it's dried out, then it's already stuck to the side. He says, don't go and soak it now, because in doing so, all you are doing is changing the current state and really preparing for Motzei Shabbat. Rav Ben Zion Abba Shaul, source number 46, he is even more machmir than this. He says, says if you have no need for the utensils now on Shabbat, you can't wash them. So mishum mechin mishabat lachol hu adin shematotam ena shototam b'mayim. For the same reason, he says He says soaking is not any Shabbat need, but it's preparing it for after Shabbat, and therefore he says that you cannot do that. Now, there are other leniencies, meaning there are other cases where I'm not going to use the plates again on Shabbat, but maybe I'd still be allowed to wash them, or at the very least to rinse them off. For example, if I leave all the plates with all the food that's on them, it's going to cause an unpleasant smell, it might cause insects and things to come. So that's not a preparation for after Shabbat, that's a need for right now. So that's what the Tzitz Eliezer has a tshuva who was asked by Mashgiach in the hospital. I presume it was in Shaarei Tzedek, because he was the Rav, he got all the shailot about Shaarei Tzedek Hospital. But so this is the question. He says, Nish'alti Mashgiach Beit HaCholim. אם אפשר להתיר הדחת כלי אכילה בית החולים לאחר גמר ארוחות בשבת ויום טוב. Says, can we wash the plates in the hospital, in the cafeteria, whatever, after the meal on Shabbat and Yom Tov? On Shabbat during the day. I guess Yom Tov would apply as well. They're not going to use those plates again the same day. The management of the hospital and the Ministry of Health require this. Yeah, it's not in order that the plates are going to be ready to use on Motzei Shabbat. Right? You want to come on Motzei Shabbat and wash them, that's not the issue. Sanitarium, right? In order for sanitary reasons. You're going to leave dirty plates in the hospital for many hours. That's not going to be very good hygienically, and therefore he says that is not a problem. Right at the bottom, the last two lines, wherever the purpose is for the day itself, it's a Shabbat need, therefore it's going to be mutar. So based on that reasoning as well, and Rav Yosef says the same. So there are poskim who discuss, right? How far can I take this? Meaning, if I have dishes in my house on Shabbat, right, and I don't want the kitchen to look like full of dirty dishes, etc. Can I wash the plates even though I'm not going to use them? So again, if the reason that you're washing them is because you want to watch a film on Motzei Shabbat and you don't want to be busy washing dishes, so the answer is no. But if objectively, really, and it bothers a person and it affects the atmosphere of Shabbat, or the fact that you have dirty dishes and saying you're washing them for the sake of Shabbat itself, not for the sake of afterwards, so then there are poskim who say that is okay. Yes.
The Shiur saw back where he came from. He said to me, "Do you leave dishes in the sink after supper?" What? it might be Italy, so it's okay.
Okay.
You know, I mean, clean and I'm always neat. All of a sudden, I'm supposed to have Shabbos overflow. It's not gonna work.
Okay, very good. So that is the truth, is that can be a good benchmark for, not always, but that can be a good benchmark for a lot of these things. Right? That's the way that you would normally do it on the weekday, the way you normally do it on Shabbat. But again, the principle is that washing for the purposes of it, if it's done in order to prepare for the weekday, that is not allowed. If there's a real Shabbat purpose, there's a Shabbat need for it, so that is something else. Okay.
If you read that you use a timed dishwasher on Shabbos, it doesn't make any noise, it's said. And you're using it after your lunch meal. And you're not gonna be using those plates again until the next week. Shouldn't that be also an issue? Or it's done automatically, it's okay?
Okay, so we spoke about dishwashers once. Dishwashers get very, very, very complicated for a number of reasons. But where it does come up, I think there was actually something here. Where the poskim talk about, let's say even if the dishwasher is not going to come on, right? The question is, are you allowed to stack let's say the dishwasher is off, you're clearing off the plates, are you allowed to stack them in the dishwasher? So I think there was a discussion here. I saw it somewhere in the book and now I can't find it. Let's leave that open for a moment because it may be here, and if it's not, we'll come back to it. Okay, but other similar questions here in case of hachana as well. So one case that comes up is regarding making the beds. It's interesting. We find in the Gemara and the Mishnah this concept of matzian mitot, making the beds, just like houses today are not the same as houses were in the days of the Gemara. Beds nowadays are not necessarily the same as beds in the days of the Gemara. Right? Nowadays, when we talk about a bed, everybody knows what I'm talking about. You have a bed, which is in your bedroom, which is where you sleep, which is always there. Days of the Gemara, it might be referring to the beds that you sleep on. It might be referring to the beds that you eat on, right? On sort of different fold-up couches and things, which were assembled and disassembled, and so it may be a different reality. So that's important to bear in mind. But the Mishnah says, "Matziin et hamitot milelei Shabbat leShabbat, aval lo miShabbat leMotzei Shabbat." So we prepare the beds, we make the beds, whatever that means, on Friday night for Shabbat day. But you cannot make the beds on Shabbat for Motzei Shabbat. Again, the same principle of Hachana. Says here the Magen Avraham, in source number 49, he says, "Ein matzin hamitot mishabbat lemotzei Shabbat. Nir'eh li, demita omedet b'cheder shedar sham." He says, if we're dealing with a bed in a room in which you stay, ve'ika bizayon v'davar mugoneh she'amod kach mutar latzio. Again, the idea is when I'm making the bed, am I making the bed in order for the sake of sleeping in it the next night? Or am I making the bed so that now I have a made bed, so that the room is pleasant and tidy and nice to be in? If I'm making the bed for that purpose, so it's on Shabbat, I'm not making, even though the next time I'm going to sleep in it is after Shabbat, but I'm not making like you said, I'm not making the bed so that I can sleep in on Motzei Shabbat. I'm making it because in the morning I make my bed. How can I have a room where I'm going to be in and spend off my Shabbat and the bed is unkept? So therefore, that would not be an issue. So the Shulchan even goes further. He explains that the beds in their days were different and making them was a big deal. He says nowadays just the part which is in bold. Source number 50. He says Bizmaneinu sheminag shakalim v'aksatot, that the pillows and the blankets are always munachim tamid al hamita, always on the beds. Unless you have young kids around who are throwing them and they're always on the floor. But generally speaking, the pillows and blankets are always on the beds. And when you wake up, you make the beds and you put the sheet on top and make it nice. Of course you can do that on Shabbat as well. Even if you're not going to be in that room throughout Shabbat, you're going to be somewhere else. But nonetheless, that's the way we do it. If this is not preparation for after Shabbat, but this is the way that you do it every day, and that's to keep it neat and tidy, and that is fine. Okay. Another one that comes up is folding clothes. Folding clothes on Shabbat, and this comes up regarding folding a talit. Very, very common question. So the Mishnah here in Shabbat also says, the same Mishnah, it says, Mekaplin et ha-kelim afilu arba v'chamisha pe'amim. Always point out when we have in the commercial as well, the word kelim, we generally talk about kelim in terms of vessels, pots and pans, etc. Kelim also refers to clothes. So we can fold them up. It says you can fold them even 4 or 5 times, I think 4 or 5 folds. What does that exactly mean? The Gemara over here puts a number of limitations on this. It says, Amri Tavei Rabbi Yanai, Lo shanu ela be'adam echad, aval b'shnei b'nei adam lo. This is only when one person is folding the garment, not when 2 people are doing. When 2 people are standing and folding it, and you're very, very careful and you imagine when when you go to the dry cleaners and you take out your garments, and you have one person standing here, and it's very exacting the folds and how it has to be, right? It says, "V'adam echad nami lo amran ela b'chadashim, aval b'yeshenim lo." He says you can fold new clothes but not old clothes. V'chadashim nami lo amram ela b'levanim, aval b'tzvim lo. Whether it's white garments versus colored garments, and lo amru ela she'eno la'achlif. So just to read the box underneath, we're on page 282 now. Okay, so Rashi explains that the first 3 limitations here are designed to prevent the appearance of fixing one's clothes on Shabbat. If 2 people fold the clothes together, or the clothes are old or colored, this helps to stretch out creases, which is similar to fixing the clothing. The 4th limitation is clearly similar to the limitation of making beds on Shabbat. These activities are only permitted if they are necessary for Shabbat. One who has other clothes change to these clothes rather than fold the clothes he was wearing previously. So the result seems to be, all these limitations, that in most instances we don't fold clothes on Shabbat. However, the Rabbi adds these limitations only apply if one is folding clothes along their original creases. But if it's in a different manner, that's permitted. That's what you see in source number 53. And the Shulchan Aruch summarizes here in number 54. It says, "Makablim kelim b'Shabbat l'tzorch Shabbat lelavsham bo bayom." You can fold your clothes on Shabbat in order for the sake of Shabbat, to keep them tidy, to wear them the same day. Okay, we'll just skip to the end. He says, "Yesh mi shomer delekaplo shelo kased lekipul harishon." If you're folding them not along the original folds, that is mutar b'chol inyan v'nin dvarav. He says that is permitted, and that would be correct. So based on all of this, says the Tosfot, again, a lot of these halachot are not so practical nowadays, but the Tosfot says, based on this, it says, "Mikan lamadnu dasur lakapel talito shebeit hakneset lefi shem tzorech machar." If we're dealing with folding clothes and folding them in a specific and a special way in order to prepare them for the next day, so he says when you fold the talit, why are you folding it? You're only going to wear it again on Sunday after Shabbat, and therefore folding it here is a problem. So it says the Tosfot. Says the Kolbo in the following source 56. He says when we fold clothes nowadays, it's not like folding in the days of the Gemara. In those days, folding is essentially the equivalent of what today we have ironing. That's the way they would do it. They would do it in a very specific way. They would stretch it out. They would fold it in a very, very specific way. And that's not what we do. So regarding the talit, again, there are a number of different opinions on this. But the middle ground, many poskim say, if a person is very, very particular with the talit to fold it exactly along the folds and to stretch it out in such a way, so that there's room to be more stringent about. But if you're just folding it to keep it tidy, but without going along again, there are some people that are more machmer even than that. But says the Pnei Halacha, source number 57, he says, "Yesh letzayen ki b'vo'al hatalitot she'anu konim meguatzim ba'ofen shekashe lekablam bidyuk hagiu tzana l'rishon." This is at the end of the day, it's very difficult to get it exactly along the same folds every time. And lefichach, therefore he says, "Mutar la'adam lakaper kedarko et talito achar tefillah." He says a person can fold the talit normally after davening. Shekenu eino chozar kol hakfalim muguatzim shebetalito. Okay, so he takes a bit of a lenient approach. As I said, there are those that are more stringent regarding the talit, but generally most of the poskim say, so long as you're not super makpid to go according to exactly the folds, if a person wants to be stringent, so you could, if you would intentionally fold it not along the folds, that would also be sufficient. Okay, I think we're going to get back to the topic of the dishes. Yeah, this is where it is. I remember it was somewhere in the Shiur, but this will end off. Just a couple of other things regarding preparations for the week. So the Shmirat Shabbat says, source number 58. He says, we cannot prepare from Shabbat or Yom Tov for a weekday. This is, by the way, this is why when we have Rosh Hashanah and you have the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah in Chutz La'aretz, you have it whenever you have 2 days of Yom Tov. but or if I have Yom Tov after Shabbat, so we always make sure to say we can't prepare right from one day to the next. The reason why when we have Yom Tov, we have the second day of Yom Tov, really intrinsically, is really only meant to be one day of Yom Tov, and therefore, that's why we say you can't prepare from one day to the next. But so we say like this: Hachana Perusha. What does Hachana mean? Kol davar she'adam oseh, anything which you do, v'eino l'tzorech oto hayom, and it's not for the sake of the same day. Afilu ein bo ela torach muat. Even if it's only a small effort, meaning even if it's not a melacha or anything like that, but it's just a small something, but it's done specifically for the next day. Even if it consists merely of sleeping. And this comes out if a person says, I'm going to go have a rest so that after Shabbat I won't be tired, right? That's a you shouldn't say that. He says, now, after Sudah Shlishit, you can clear the dishes off the table. Obviously, the earlier meals, you can clear the dishes off the table because you're going to use the table again, right? But after Sudah Shlishit, an implication where I won't be using the table, nonetheless, clear it off. Why? Or said before, you still want the room to look nice, to be pleasant. You don't want to get insects all over the table. You can therefore clear it up. Once we say you can take the pots and pans and plates out and you can take them to the kitchen, so you don't have to, put it down the second you get into the kitchen. You can still arrange them in an orderly fashion. Obviously, don't start sorting things in a way that's forbidden. So you want to put them in the most convenient way. You're just going to put them down and you can come Motzei Shabbat and clean them, that's fine. אבל אסור להסיר את כלי הסעודה ברגעים האחרונים של השבת, שכבר אינו צריך לחדר מסודר. Right, if you're finishing Sudah Shlishit, 2 minutes before you're going to go and start having Ma'ariv, so then you have no need for that. That's a bona fide preparation for after Shabbat. So that you shouldn't do. Or even if it's in the middle earlier in the day, you finish your meal, you're not going to come back until after Motzei Shabbat. So having the room tidy is only a need for Motzei Shabbat. So that also you shouldn't do. So we asked before, what about putting dirty dishes in the dishwasher? Again, this is where, without getting into the question of automation, if you're going to even wash the dishes, but just placing them there in the first place. So the Ego of Moshe in source number 59, he says, Kelim melochlachim misudat Shabbat. What's called in Hebrew a dishwasher. Right? In order to wash them after Shabbat. Can you place them there in order the way they would be washed? So he says, he says that is, you're allowed to put the dishes away in the dishwasher. That's not called preparation. שבשביל היום טוב, לאנשי הבית שלא יצאו בבית, מקום שבאים לשם כלים מלוכלכים, טוב יותר להניחם שם מלאכה סוטה. He says, you want to put them away, you want the house to look tidy, right? I know people who sometimes they have the dishes in the sink and they have guests coming over there and they don't want to wash everything up, so they put the dishes in the oven, right? When it's off, just to put it somewhere so that it won't be. So he says, you don't have to worry about that. You can put them in the dishwasher. אבל לסדרם בכוונה אסור מצד הכנה, ולפעמים גם משום בורר ובלא כוונה, אלא שמתחילה לסרקן מעל השולחן היה נקה לסלק גדולים וקטנים מותר. He says, if it's easier when you're taking them off the table, you gather up all the big plates and you gather up all the small plates, put them in the thing. If you're putting them in the dishwasher in a very specific order, you're not just putting them in, but a very specific order, because that's how you want to have them washed on Motzei Shabbat. So that is more problematic. Okay, if you have the situation where, with all the caveats that apply, and there's a way for the dishwasher to run on an automatic cycle on Shabbat, okay, so certainly if you're doing it in such a way and it's doing it automatically and it's with a timer and everything and it's mutar, and you're probably going to use those dishes again on Shabbat itself, so then there's no issue. Then you can put the dishes in.
The only reason
Yes.
that you don't want to sleep for long time, what happened in this place, you won't be able to sleep on Motzei Shabbat. It's that you have to sleep often.
I'll leave you to think about that one. All right. Shakar, thank you, everybody. Yeah. Okay. All right. That's it. I'd count for today. We'll be back next week. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful week.